What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and they carry inside. Mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, watch that sound. Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner with the Robust Opposition, and I'm so excited for my show tonight because I've got 4 guests. This is the most guests I've ever had at any one time. These 4 are the Venezuelan Embassy 4, I call them. David doesn't like that because he knows it's more of a collective than just 4 of you, but I was trying to think of something catchy, you know, like the Chicago 7. We won't use that anymore, but you guys were the last protectors, the final 4, if you will, in the embassy, evicted last Thursday. Why don't we have everybody introduce themselves and give a little bit of a bio? And we'll start with you, Kevin and Margaret.
This is Margaret Flowers, and I'm co-director of Popular Resistance, and we are one of the 3 organizations that started the Embassy Protection Collective on April 10th of this year.
I'm Kevin Zeese. I'm also co-director of Popular Resistance, and we were in the embassy from April 10th till 37 days later when the police removed us. I'm a lawyer. I've been working on political issues since the early 80s. My first issues were ending the mass incarceration caused by the drug war and the marijuana war, medical marijuana war, the Colombian drug war,
Peace.
All sorts of peace issues, third-party politics. I was Ralph Nader's spokesperson in 2004, ran for Senate in 2006, and have worked on a wide variety of economic, racial, and environmental justice issues, as well as peace, my whole career.
Well, I'm a pediatrician by training. I practiced for 17 years. I left practice in 2007. I've done a lot of work on National Improved Medicare for All, and then just also on a whole variety of issues, like Kevin said, racial, economic, and environmental justice and peace.
And I should note that I've worked with the both of you on several of these issues, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership and net neutrality.
That's right.
Now, let's
go way back.
Remember the days when you used to think I was a Democratic Party?
I still do.
You still do. Even though I dem exited 2 years ago, Kevin, you still don't believe me.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Adrienne. Hi, Adrienne.
Hi, so I'm a medical anthropologist. I teach at American University, and most of my work has been looking at violence and imperialism in Honduras, although I've also worked quite a bit with nurses organizing against the neoliberalism, neoliberal fascism, the privatization of the healthcare system, and fighting for single payer in the United States.
Great. So now let's go to David. David Paul.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, well, mine will be very brief. I'm a retired nurse practitioner, been very interested in Latin America vis-a-vis the United States and all its long history of intervention. Worked in Nicaragua Solidarity in the 80s and 90s after working on the anti-Vietnam War movement. And 2 areas of interest have been election integrity and Medicare for All issues. And some recent travels to Latin America, including Venezuela, which helped me have a little clearer picture of what was what was happening there and what our country was doing. And as a concerned citizen, I came to Washington to be part of the effort to make that the wrong and the illegality and immorality of what our government is doing, make it more visible to people by participating in this collective. So that's me.
Now, that's great. You and I went to Cuba together as part of the Code Pink trip in Valentine's week of 2014.
14, right.
Yeah.
That was quite a trip.
Yes, it was. So now, David just said what brought him there, and we know that Margaret and Kevin were two of the organizers. What brought you to be part of the Embassy Protection Collective, Adrian?
Well, with my experience working in Honduras for the past 20 years, I have seen the devastating impacts of the 2009 military coup that was carried out and supported by the United States government fully, the Clinton State Department at that time. It's really resulted in what I refer to as a dictatorship of neoliberal fascism. The current president is not elected. In order to secure his presidency, he and his police forces and military forces had to kill around 40 people during the uprising that followed his theft of the election in 2017, and they've jailed dozens of political prisoners as well. And so I've seen the terror that is really the everyday existence of Hondurans following a coup that really follows the same logic of the attempted coup in Venezuela, that it's a small group of wealthy right-wing elites allied with the United States government and other foreign economic interests who are trying to take control of the country's resources for their profit to the detriment of everybody else. And so that means privatizing the extractive industries, privatizing the land, taking away the water rights. So it's been devastating for Hondurans. It's the cause of the great migration that we're seeing north, where people are leaving in the tens of thousands, and despite knowing full well that what they're facing at the border is concentration camps, family separation, xenophobia, violence from ICE officers. And I knowing what I know, I felt like I could not not go to the embassy once I saw the amazing work that people were doing there. And I was invited to give one of the talks in the early days that they were holding, public talks that were really just so fantastic. I really, when I went and I spoke about Honduras and the coup there and why it was so important for us to unite against the coup in Venezuela, I realized that I had to go further than just talking about it and put my body on the line along with these wonderful people.
Great. So now, Kevin and Margaret, why don't you tell us about what you had in mind when you first went into the embassy? You got the idea because the ambassador was being sent home, and he gave you the keys. And how did you think this would go down?
Well, I'll start. So, right, what we had seen shortly after we returned from Venezuela in March was that the New York consulate and military attaché offices in D.C. were handed over to this coup leader who, failed. The coup failed in Venezuela. President Maduro is in power. And they set their sights next on the main embassy in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown. And activists had tried to get to the consulate and the attaché offices when they were being taken over and stop it, but they weren't able to. Law enforcement officials from the U.S. assisted in those takeovers. And so we felt like, maybe if we stayed in the Venezuelan embassy 24/7, we'd be able to prevent them from coming in. And we weren't really sure at the time, like, how we were going to do that. But we started out with Medea Benjamin of Code Pink, and we also worked with the Answer Coalition. We created this collective, and the first week we really tried looking for a legal avenue. We talked to all sorts of lawyers about whether we could get an injunction to stop this illegal takeover in violation of the Vienna Convention. And what we learned is that that's not a possibility, because the way our judicial system is set up, this is a political question, and judges would defer to the executive branch, the office of the government that would be responsible for that political decision. So they wouldn't be willing to have an injunction. And so then we thought, well, what we're going to have to do is just get as much attention as we can for this, get as many people as we can here, and hopefully make it politically unpopular for the U.S. government to violate the Vienna Convention and turn over this embassy to an unelected coup, U.S. puppet. You want to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, when we started this, people asked, do you really think we can stop this takeover? And I know from my experience in other campaigns that when you start something like this, an initiative like this, it's very unpredictable. I know that from our experience with Occupy, we helped to start the Occupy movement in Washington, D.C., that when you occupy public space, you also occupy part of the public dialogue. And so we knew that by being in the embassy, we'd be taking a stand, and that stand would result in exposing this issue. So that was one thing we knew. But we don't know how the government's going to react. We don't know how our allies are going to react. We don't know how people who support the coup are going to react. All those were unpredictables. We didn't know how the media was going to react. All unpredictable. And so all you can do in these kind of things is you go in, you take your position, and you are prepared to adapt to the circumstances and evolve as the situation evolves. And we had to go through several evolutions in this process. Adrian described the beginning of the collective when we were able to go in and out of the building. We were holding forums every night. 100 people would show up at a forum. We had issues on Honduras was mentioned, Venezuela updates. We did a session on AFRICOM. We did a session with John Kiriakou, an insider's view of CIA regime change operations, since he was a former CIA agent. So we did a whole series of different forums. That was so easy. And then when the Guaido attempted coup, his third try, his military coup attempt was going on, opposition coup supporters started to show up at the building. And that really changed the whole environment. We had to adapt to that.
You were free to go in and go out for 2 weeks. And then when those goons came and they set up those canopies and they started assaulting, our side, so to speak, verbally and physically assaulting and playing the noisemakers, showing the
Lights.
lights. I mean, it put me in mind of Abu Ghraib, quite frankly, to see what they were doing, intimidate you or get you out of there or whatever. Was there ever a point when you did invite or you thought to invite some of those opposition people in to have like a civil kind of panel discussion where you would air your side and they would air their side? Was that ever an option?
So that was not an option, because the people that were there, and actually later we suspected this from the beginning because of their behavior, but later it was actually confirmed when we overheard some police officers doing shift change and talking about what was going on, and referred to the people who were occupying the outside of the embassy with tents surrounding it 24/7, with sentries, as you said, assaulting people and threatening and harassing us, that they were basically the U.S. government. And we saw
that was what the police said.
The police called them. They said the people around the embassy are basically the U.S. government. and what we saw from the very first day is that these were people who, if you engaged them at all, they escalated, and the things they were saying were so outrageous and so much lies and so verbally abusive, giving us death threats, rape threats, calling us, vile things. These were not people who had any interest in engaging in a civil discussion with us. They were there because the State Department could not legally remove us. We were there with the permission of the elected government. And so their strategy was, well, we'll bring these people in, give them all the resources that they need, and see if we can harass these people out of them. And yeah, basically they said we're using terror to get us out of the building. And I know David and Adrian can speak to that very well. They were there that whole time.
The terror was actually one of their words they were using to describe their methods.
Yeah.
Kind of escalated over a week or so, and certainly dialogue was not something I was thinking as an option. It was just a matter of protecting the space we were at and protecting the building. But it was pretty intimidating, trying to keep us from sleeping, scaring us, threatening us, and they broke in a few times. And we tried to prevent that so we could continue the kind of community and discussions and that we had within our collective, and speaking to the people on the outside and any media that would listen to us about what was going on. but it was kind of very stressful to have to deal with constant break-ins in the midst of this other things we were trying to do there. And we had varied success until the police came in at the very end.
Well, I wanted to ask you before we get to the very end, when did you get to the point when you realized that if you went out of there, you weren't going to be able to get back in? And what were your calculations at that point about who was going to stay and who was going to go and what was going to go on after that?
That was probably true in a couple of weeks before it was over, though it's not really over. We're continuing being a part of the discussion. We sort of took intermittent polls about who was willing to stay here and risk being arrested. That changed over time. Many people had other obligations, and they stated that they had to leave early and could not risk arrest or couldn't stay any longer, whether it was family or job or other things. And in the last week or so, we made a decision that it would be good to reduce our numbers so our food and water that we were trying to save could last longer. And we made that decision. And it came down to the numbers we ended up with.
When they were preventing the food from getting in, and I got to ask, does anyone know why Jerry Condon was trying to send in a cucumber? I mean, a cucumber has no calories. Why would he be trying to send in
that was part of a whole effort to bring food in at that moment. And they had tried to get bags up to us, but it became impossible. And so I looked at Jerry. He had a cucumber in his hand. And I put my hands out like this, and he reacted and threw to it. And then the police reacted immediately as he was throwing. In fact, they pulled his hand down and put a hand behind his back and threw him to the ground and bloodied his face. So it was just a reactive moment. But there were many attempts to get food in, and many successful attempts. There were some failures, but there were enough successes that we had a pretty good pantry of food at the end. I'm sure the police, when they came in and saw our food supply and our water supply, they realized that we really were prepared to be there for another month or two at least. And people got food in. We really put a lot of faith in our allies outside because they knew our situation. We were able to communicate with them what our situation was, and we knew they would do what they could to get food in. And there's some really amazing efforts that were successful to get pretty large amounts of food in. And then we were very careful with the food. Another role of David's was to put us on a regimen so we wouldn't. He hates when I say that.
We were already on a regimen.
I was one of many voices about saying
there were many voices. That's true. And of 2 meals a day, 2 small meals a day, really dieting and being careful with our food supply. So we were really planning for the long term, not for the short term. So it was a pretty amazing effort. And the water supply was fantastic. All the trash cans in the building were lined with plastic and filled with water. We had a lot of water. We were ready to, and Margaret had figured out what was medically necessary for us, using her medical degree to give us advice on that. So we were trying to limit our water supply as well to what we needed to live.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question about the selective enforcement by the DC police and the Secret Service. I mean, I saw that day when Ariel got arrested, there were 3 of your guys arrested and 1 of the opposition. And that was all live streamed. It was really annoying to me. I contacted the Secret Service media officer because Medea kept saying, what are you arresting them for? What are the charges? And none of the officers would talk to her or anybody. They just kept saying, call the media officer. So I emailed them, and they told me that the charges were throwing missiles. And then in parentheses, they wrote objects. And then the next thing was simple assault. So now I feel like all you have to do is look at the live stream to know that that wasn't the case. So are these guys planning to do any kind of suing of the police or false arrest, as far as you know?
I think it's probably too soon to talk about that. Where people are right now focused on the criminal prosecutions and handling those as best we can. We have a lot of work to do as far as discovery, and figuring out our legal defense. And I think we're focused on the criminal defense at this point. No one's thinking about a lawsuit against the police right now. But I think that your image is right, that over and over again, we saw people who were assaulted actually charged with assault, while the person who was doing the assaulting, someone from the pro-coup side, was not charged. And that happened repeatedly. So there are many cases that occurred where people who are supporters of ours were charged with assaults, but were really victims of assaults. And none of those people who broke into the building, I think David mentioned we had 3 break-ins, none of those people who broke into the building were ever arrested. They all were allowed to go out, get a pat on their back, take selfies with their friends, and be heroes among the pro-coup forces outside.
Now, I have a question about Roger Waters because he was very effective. He did a live stream from inside. Maybe it was the 3rd night before you guys were arrested. And he did it by candlelight because they had cut off the electricity. And there were, when I saw the video, there were 76,000 views of it, which was awesome because he brought a lot more attention to it, considering the mainstream media was not covering it. How was he able to get in at that point?
Go ahead.
That was just a solidarity video that he did from wherever he was. But yeah, no, and he stated in it that he had the candle, you know, basically in recognition of the fact that we were over here in Washington without light, and he had a can of beans, sort of symbolically, you know, pointing out that we didn't have, you know, we weren't eating gourmet meals, but.
What'd you say? We had some great gourmet meals.
We did. We're making a cookbook.
We got a cookbook, man. Come on.
But the video was really, it just lifted our spirits so much. I wasted probably a good 6% of my precious phone battery percentage charge on it because at the time, of course, we didn't have electricity, so we had to rely on creative means. It was also wonderful to have the support of dozens of individual Venezuelans who sent us videos that they had made by themselves and somehow managed them to get them to somebody to send to us. They weren't even posting them online. They were just, you know, direct message thanking us and thanking us for our solidarity and giving their support. And really having that support and the people outside every day made it so easy for us to do this. In addition, the fact that the U.S. government and the right-wing mob outside were preventing us food and electricity and water gave us like a little tiny taste of what the Venezuelan people have to suffer on a day-to-day basis as a result of the U.S.-led blockade against their country. Was, you know, telling that they use the same tactics against us for standing in solidarity with the Venezuelan people. And, you know, we suffered so little compared to what the Venezuelan people suffer, and to, you know, what people around the world who live in countries that the United States government doesn't like their government, you know, so it was great.
Let me ask you about your communications from inside there. I know that you guys were posting a popular resistance newsletter periodically that I was getting through my email. Were you sending regular press releases to the mainstream media? And if so, how were they received? Because I didn't see any mainstream media coverage until the very end.
Initially, we were working from there, and we had our computers and we had internet, and we were just doing our regular work in addition to the organizing that we were doing around, you know, trying to identify a legal strategy, organizing the public events that we were doing every night, coordinating with people that were coming down, orientating them when they showed up. But then the first time that we thought the police were going to come and raid, we kind of packed our stuff into a truck and, you know, to have it go out in case we were raided, and the truck went out and never was able to come back again. So we lost our computer, and then we were able to borrow one that somebody had. So we were very restricted in what we could do. And then we lost our power. So then we had no internet, and very difficult to charge our phones even to use those. So we literally were like every 1% of our like charge on our phones was precious, and how are you going to use that? And so, we didn't early on. I guess we did some press releases that went out, and CNN showed up at the very beginning and quickly disappeared.
But they were just there because they were told something was going to happen,
Right.
And they were monitoring it, kind of.
They wanted to catch it.
And then they were told to monitor the back door to see who came in and went out. They wanted to capture everybody. But then after that, they disappeared and never came back.
Right. So mainly we had embedded media. We had Anya Parampil from the Gray Zone Project. We had Alex Rubenstein from Mint Press News. Telesaur was embedded until our freedom to come and go ended, and then they were on the outside the entire time. And then we had other independent and foreign media that were out there. You mentioned Ford Fisher. We had RT out there. And then at the very last week, ABC News started coming.
Local ABC.
The local ABC. And also then NBC came. And the Washington Post was covering it, but the coverage from the corporate media was really very biased against us and misleading.
The Washington Post may as well have been embedded with the opposition, the pro-coup people, because they reported from a pro-coup perspective.
Yeah.
And
all the lies.
Terrible reporting.
Yeah.
And for Popular Resistance, luckily, people on the outside who work with us picked up the slack. They were able to increase their role in keeping the website up to date and helping to get the daily newsletters out each day. So we were able to have our team take up a lot of the slack we couldn't do.
Now, did any members of the like elected officials come? I know I tried to get Tulsi a week ago. Yesterday, I went to her on Mother's Day. I went to her town hall in Malibu, and I asked her to come out. And it was really funny because the president of the Malibu Dem Club, who's real establishment, yanked the mic away from me when I was in the middle of my question. But I persevered, and I let her know that, if she wants to talk about ending regime change wars as president, well, now she's a congressperson, and this is regime change soft war or soft power or whatever you call the sanctions. So I asked her if she would go and if she would introduce a bill to end the sanctions. And she said she was in conversation with people in the embassy, and she was going to see where she could be most useful. And as far as I can see, she didn't really do anything. So I was wondering if any elected officials came and showed support or even tweeted support.
Both Tulsi and Ro Khanna tweeted support, but no one came. Mike Gravel also tweeted support, but he didn't come either. We did reach out to some of these people, but
including our own Congress member,
and including John Sarbanes, our own Congress member.
Yeah.
But none of them came out. The only politician, if you want to call him that came out was Jesse Jackson, who ran for president twice, but really is more of a civil rights activist than he is a politician. And he came, and that was very supportive.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I made a video, a 3.5-minute video, which I sent you, Kevin, from Ford Fisher's live stream.
I didn't see that. I've looked for that.
Yeah, Jesse, getting the food and you throwing down the backpack so he could put the food in there. And Ajamu Baraka was holding back the opposition goon who was trying to prevent you. I mean, it was really.
Ajamu was very proud of that. Ajamu was very proud of that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that if you want to talk about like who showed up, it was much more Green Party people. We had Sherry Honkala, former Green Party vice presidential candidate, come down numerous times and try to get us food.
With the Poor People's Army.
Yeah, Ajamu Baraka came and he actually helped. He and another Green, Paul Pumphrey, really pulled back the opposition and contained him so that we were able to get that food from Jesse Jackson. A lot of Greens came down from New Jersey and other places. So.
And I see Howie Hawkins. I saw since I got out that Howie Hawkins, who's considering running for the presidency for the Green Party, put out 3 statements about on his HowieHawkins.us page. You can see his 3 statements on the situation in Venezuela and the embassy.
As well as the Green Party National put out some statements.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was an incredible victory. When you have these, as an organizer, we look forward to these small victories because they boost morale and they help grow the movement. That to me was one of those small victories. And then the very next day, actually, which was the day, maybe it was that same day when they came in and then they were talking to you. Describe how that went down. They were talking to you guys. Mara was in there, and then they left without arresting you.
Well, that was the Monday before the Thursday that they arrested us. So I don't remember the exact date, but it was quite dramatic because we got the call that we were going to be evicted, that we were going to be arrested. They posted notices all over the building. All of the opposition, the right-wing mob that had been camping outside, very quickly went and gathered all of their things and went around the front, like very eagerly waiting for their puppet masters to evict us. And, you know, they were high-fiving and stuff. And so it was clear that they meant business, or apparently they did. But the notices that they put up with a ostensible warrant actually didn't have any letterhead. They weren't signed by anybody. And, you know, they told us, they negotiated with Mara, and, you know, we figured out that they were going to come in. So we all went downstairs to wait for them, to wait to be arrested. And they broke in through the front door. And then they came into the vestibule and asked us if we were willing, if we would come willingly with them. And of course we said no, because we were there legally and we were there at the invitation, not the invitation, but with the permission, the full permission of the elected Venezuelan government. So we had no reason to leave. And then Kevin and Margaret did some fantastic police education. For about half an hour about why they had no authority to arrest us, and the danger of their following the illegal order to come into the building, to violate the Vienna Convention, to set a precedent that would put all embassies at risk around the world, and frankly to start off a chain of events that would very likely lead to a civil war in Venezuela and a global conflict. And so, you know, they very powerfully made these arguments. David and I chimed in once or twice. And then every time there was a pause, they would just ask us, will you leave willingly? And we would repeat, no, we will not leave willingly. And Kevin suggested that they go talk to their superiors and, you know, leave us alone. And in fact, that's what they ended up doing. You know, either we convinced them or we called their bluff, one way or another. But they ended up saying, "All right, well, we're just going to close the door, and you can leave whenever you want." And we got to stay inside for another 4 days. So it was really a fantastic victory. And when they did come in with full military force, you know, we still had that victory from Monday, and we still had the moral victory that we knew we were there legally and we had nothing to be ashamed of.
It seemed like that you were putting the fear of God into them, that they could be liable for obeying an unlawful order, and they could be subject to arrest. So I'm wondering if that had anything to do with it.
That was definitely mentioned.
Yeah,
repeatedly.
His lawyer hat and said, and you know, following an illegal order doesn't hold up in a criminal defense.
Yeah, and we made it very clear to them they were the ones that would be acting unlawfully. We were there lawfully, and we're not violating any laws. If they entered, they'd be violating the laws. They'd be the ones trespassing. They'd be the ones that were causing an international incident that could lead to all sorts of catastrophes, as Adrian described. And I think they were listening. They seemed affected by it.
Well, even when they came on Thursday and arrested us, when they came in and you know, they came into the building, they used a battering ram to break their way in because they didn't have keys. We had keys. And we heard them coming in, and we said, hey, we're up on the second floor. We didn't want them to be freaked out or anything. We were just up in the conference room, kind of had gotten our stuff together. And when they came in, we started, and I think they started reading us the warrant for our arrest. And we just said, again, we said, you know, we're here legally with the permission. And again, talked to them about the fact that this was violating the Vienna Convention, that was starting a terrible precedent that could put U.S. embassies on all embassies and U.S. embassy personnel at risk, increase conflict, could potentially escalate to a global conflict involving Russia and China. And they were literally like looking down. They were I think it did impact them.
No,
What we were saying.
no police officer was showing his name badge.
Yeah, or her.
Badges, they didn't identify themselves. We just knew the one name of the State Department official who
We had met.
who had filed the complaint and got the arrest warrant. Otherwise, everyone was anonymous. They didn't identify themselves or show their name badge at all. So I think everyone knew they were probably doing something illegal, and were very likely to be held accountable for it in the future.
Now, did you go quietly, or did they have to manhandle you?
We told them in writing and verbally before they came in, before that Monday when they came in, that we were not going to blockade ourselves in or run around and hide in the building, that we were going to be waiting in an area for them to come in, and if they chose to arrest us, we would not resist the arrest, but we would not leave voluntarily. So we didn't resist, but we didn't leave voluntarily.
And how did that feel for you? Let's talk to David and Adrian now, whichever one wants to go first. How did that feel at that moment? Was your heart pounding? I mean, what were you thinking?
Well, for me personally, I was, we were expecting this for many days. It was almost, it was just strange for when it actually happened. I was a little concerned because of the timing of it, that our people on the outside would not see us. We had scheduled to have people film the arrests. I was a little nervous about that. I wasn't particularly worried about our safety at that point. Yeah, but it was, nerve-wracking. Became more nerve-wracking later when stuck in these little cells for hours and hours. But the arrest itself wasn't particularly more nerve-wracking than the stress of hearing these opposition mob trying to break in the building and not knowing what they would do. That was more stressful to me.
Now, how did you feel, Adrian, at that moment?
To me, I was just sort of overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all, the taxpayer expense, the military operation, the violence with which they broke into the building when they could have just simply opened the front door, the flak jackets, the being armed to the teeth, when, we're just for peace activists in, legally in an embassy. Really seemed absurd. I mean, if anything, I was disappointed that we weren't able to go out the front door because, I think that that the media and the world deserve to see very clearly what the United States was doing in violating the Vienna Convention with this ridiculous show of force. I didn't feel. I was bored for the day that we were in jail, although for much of it, I had the pleasure of sharing my cell with Margaret. So that was delightful. But really, it was nothing compared, again, to the violence that the people of Venezuela suffer at the hands of the United States, the terrorism that the United States is using against the people of Venezuela, and what they potentially face should this U.S.-led coup eventually succeed. So I felt strong in my convictions and proud of what I was doing, and that really was that more important than any minor inconvenience of spending the night in jail.
Now, I understand that you were just charged with a misdemeanor, which sounds like a slap on the wrist. So what do you think of that? Are you appealing that? And what are you going to do with your lawyers as far as the gross violation of international law? You were saying earlier that it was really more of a political thing, nothing that could be done in the courts. Is it similar to, what they did to you? Is that also political? Nothing you can do in the courts?
Well, I mean, they weren't able to charge us with trespassing because we weren't trespassing. So they had to find something very creative, and they charged us with interfering with protective services, which is a federal misdemeanor, Class A misdemeanor that actually carries potential sentence of up to a year in prison and $100,000 fine, plus an additional year on probation. So this actually qualifies us for a jury trial. And so we are talking to our lawyers and figuring out, the legal strategy. And we don't have that, it's just very early. We were just arrested on Thursday and released on Friday. But as far as the violation of the Vienna Convention, that is something that can be brought before the United Nations and the International Court of Justice. In fact, in 1979, when the Iranian government was unable to protect the U.S. embassy and it was taken over by students who held the embassy personnel hostage, the U.S. sued Iran in the International Court of Justice for violating the Vienna Convention. It took 6 years for that whole process to play out, and in the end, by that time, the U.S. was involved in the Iran-Contra affair and dropped the whole thing because the lawsuit because the U.S. didn't want it to come back against them that the U.S. was violating the law in the Iran-Contra affair. So we do hope that the Venezuelan government will be able to bring this before the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, because for me, I share the same feelings that David and Adrian had, but I also had this deep sadness,
right?
Because we were so close to getting mutual protecting power agreements that the United States would have a protecting power for its embassy in Caracas, and that Venezuela would have a protecting power country for the embassy in Washington, D.C. And I felt like the fact that we were picking up momentum and that process was moving along very well, and that we had the ability to stay there for a long time. I think that the United States recognized that, oh my God, this could actually work out, and we better intervene right away and stop it. And so it was just very sad to me that the U.S. took that very violent approach instead of the legal and peaceful path to protecting both our embassy and the Venezuelan embassy.
And a protecting power agreement is not a unique or new idea. It's been used in diplomacy since the 1870s. When diplomatic relations are broken, it's a way to protect embassies. And what it means is that a third country protects the embassy of one of the other countries. So in the case of Caracas, in the U.S. embassy, Switzerland would be the protecting power and protect the U.S. embassy. In the case of the embassy in Washington, D.C. for Venezuela, Turkey would be the protecting power. In fact, Venezuela and Turkey have signed a protecting power agreement. So they are ready to move forward with that. Venezuela needs the U.S. permission, and the U.S. needs Venezuelans' permission. And so it's interesting that the U.S. State Department has approached the Maduro administration asking for them to approve the protecting power agreement.
With Switzerland, yeah.
With Switzerland. It's interesting about that is because they claim that Guaido is the president, and yet they're talking to the Maduro administration. And so it's like they're really recognizing that their fiction is fiction, that the reality is Maduro is president, and his foreign minister is who he appointed will be the one who signs the protecting power agreement. They need Maduro and the foreign minister's agreement to do that. And now on the U.S. side, we need to have Mike Pence and the Trump administration agree with Turkey and Venezuela. And if we do that, we will feel so satisfied. We always said, and you can see it in some of the pictures, we have it under our pictures on some of the pictures in the windows, that we will leave peacefully when a protecting power agreement is achieved. There are 29 protecting power agreements in place right now around the world. This is not a unique idea. This is the diplomatic solution. This is how you solve this problem, by working within international law. There was no need to invade the embassy. There was a need for diplomacy.
Right.
We saw ourselves as interim protectors, waiting for the real diplomats to solve this problem.
Now, who is in the embassy now? Because remember, the worry was they were going to put that fake ambassador, Carlos Vecchio, in there. Did they put him in there, or is it empty?
It's currently empty.
So when you say you were working to get the protecting of power agreements, were you talking to Turkey? Is that who you were?
No. We were interim protectors protecting the building from a U.S. invasion. That would get in their intent to give it over to the fictional ambassador, Carlos Vecchio. That's all we were doing. We were not negotiating anything. That was being done by the foreign ministries of Turkey and Venezuela, Switzerland, and the United States. They were negotiating, and then they were going to come together to negotiate both countries agreeing to that protecting power agreement.
And that could still happen.
That's right.
And it's important for people to be contacting the State Department and Mike Pompeo and saying that we want a mutual protecting power agreement for our embassies. We want this still to be resolved peacefully. And I hope that the United States doesn't take the next step in escalating its violation of the Vienna Convention by putting Carlos Vecchio into that embassy.
And remember, Carlos Vecchio is someone who fled Venezuela because he was inciting violence that killed more than 140 people. He's already been going to get prosecuted if he comes back to Venezuela. So he has fled Venezuela because of his violence. That's who they're talking about as this fictional ambassador.
Well, let me mention this. The New York Times today had a headline, and I know that's
a great source, the New York Times, for all regime change news.
But they did report something that's kind of favorable to our side, which is that, the opposition is currently trying to negotiate with Maduro because they know that their coup failed and their support is lessening, and the U.S. has turned its attention to Iran. So what do you think is in the future right now? Does anyone want to hazard a guess for Venezuela?
I can tell you this about Venezuela. They will not give in to U.S. domination. They are prepared for dialogue. They're participating in the Norway dialogue, as the Times and other publications have reported. They're participating in that. Maduro has always said he'd be happy to meet with President Trump to negotiate the situation. But they are also ready to fight. And they are very strong and very dedicated to their independence. These people should be treated with dignity and respect. They have a military of 200,000. They have a National Guard. They have a police force, and they have more than 2 million citizens armed and trained as part of a people's militia. That's bigger than the U.S. military. And this is not Iraq. This is not a desert. This is mountains, lakes, and trees. This is a country with an anti-missile defense system. This is a country allied with Russia and China. This is a country that the U.S. will get into this. If they get into this as a war, it'll be a quagmire that will cost trillions of dollars to result in probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths of Venezuelans as well as U.S. soldiers. It would be a tremendous blunder. Venezuela is twice as large as Iraq. It has 30 million people. Iraq had 20 million. This is a bigger challenge than Iraq, and look at the mess Iraq was. We do not want to see Latin America turned into the Middle East with the kind of chaos that exists in that area today.
All right. In closing, I'd like everybody to reflect on this experience, 34 days in the embassy, and tell viewers at home who might want to take such a stand, because people are feeling like whatever their issue is, whether it's climate change or single payer health care. I shared a live stream today of high school students trying in vain to get a meeting with their congressman, Tony Cardenas, who is one of the few Californian Democrats who've not co-sponsored the Medicare for All bill. People are ready to make, change in this country and go to more extreme methods. In light of the experience that you had, what is your advice, each of you, to people watching this that want to do something more than just go in the street and hold a sign and chant?
Lauren, I think you know that at Popular Resistance, we have the free Popular Resistance School that talks about how social transformation occurs. But basically, we have to recognize, what we're up against, the power structure that we're fighting, and use tools that are effective. And it's a broad range of tools depending on what the situation is. In this situation, we just knew that we had to do something. And that getting in there was the important thing to do, and then we would figure out from there like which tactics would be the best tactics to use, and we had to change tactics as we had to be flexible as the situation changed. And I think that's what people need to recognize is that you've got to be able to have that flexibility, but the main thing is having the conviction of knowing that what you're doing is the right thing to be doing. Exposing, the lies, exposing the corruption, and then doing whatever you can to push back against that. And I think that, I look at it as it's a situation that's much bigger than me. It's not about me personally. It's about me playing a role in a bigger picture of what's going on. And when I think about it that way, and also, as Adrian has said a number of times, the fact that what we were experiencing is so minimal compared to what Venezuelans and other people around the world experience at the hands of U.S. imperialism. It just gives you the courage to say, I just have to do everything that I'm physically capable of doing. And I think that's the kind of approach that we need to take in these times of extremity, of extreme U.S. empire, of extreme climate chaos, of extreme breakdown in our political system. People just need to recognize that what we're up against, and that it's going to take a lot of our effort to do it, but also that a small group of people has a lot of power.
Adrienne?
So I think what's really important is for people to be focused, in addition to what everything Margaret just said, is for people as they organize locally on whatever the issues that they're organizing on, that they make these connections, that they recognize that fight for healthcare is also part and parcel of the fight for the sovereignty of Venezuela. Venezuela was fighting for healthcare, and they're fighting against privatization, which is what this coup represents, this potential coup that fights for things like the right to water and life in Flint, Michigan, is parallel to the fight for those rights in Venezuela. In that, also, it's the same processes. It's the U.S. government taking away people's sovereignty, taking away their democratic rights to govern themselves, and appointing town managers, basically a coup that results in health, economic, and other devastation for those communities. So I think tying together, seeing those links, tying them together, and organizing, educating people, organizing more broadly, using whatever tactics are available to you. And I mean, it's really come to the point where we all need to be putting our bodies on the line to prevent the neoliberal fascism that this threat represents.
I've been doing this kind of work for a very long time, and I've learned a lot of lessons throughout that. Margaret mentioned the Popular Resistance School. I really urge people to go. It's 8 one-hour classes. It's free. And if you want to learn how to build movements locally or create national movements, I think that will be a great resource for people. But I mean, I know when I first started on this kind of work, I was working on marijuana legalization, and we were getting death threats. And I was arrested protesting after California passed its medical marijuana law. I was blocking the Department of Justice doors, chained ourselves to the Department of Justice doors as part of a day of national action. I got arrested and got taken to the same cell I was taken to for this embassy action. Not much has changed. We have the same bologna and cheese sandwiches. The same racism was obvious. Everyone in the cell was black except for me and David. And it was for offenses that shouldn't have even been in jail. So the same racism existed. But now medical marijuana is popular and legal in dozens of states. Legal marijuana for adults is becoming a reality for around the world. So we're making wins on that. And I've had, Lauren, we've worked together. We won the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We stopped it. Even though it was a secretly negotiated treaty, we will expose it, educate people, and mobilize people. And as part of a campaign, we stopped it. Everyone had to be against it. We're going to do the same thing with this. This is just a part of a campaign. We're going to build on this. We're going to be doing national and international days of actions. We're going to be building to a nationwide event focused on the UN General Assembly in September 21st. International Peace Day will be an event at the UN I hope people will come to and participate in. We're going to make it impossible for anyone to run for office and support this coup. We're going to be laying the groundwork for ending the future of U.S. coups. We're going to be ending regime change operations that have never worked. They've always made things worse. And we're going to be working on a responsible end to U.S. empire, whose days are numbered. It's time to be cutting military budgets, closing military bases around the world, and finding a responsible end that's best for the people of the United States and for people of the world. So this is part of a campaign. Howard Zinn said 3 things he need to do, and I'll just repeat them here. Go where you're not supposed to go, say what you're not supposed to say, and don't leave when they tell you to leave. That's great advice from Howard Zinn, and that's the advice that we try to follow.
Well, there's many ways for people to participate. You can be doing civil disobedience. You can be doing social media. You can just have your body visible. Letters to the editor, congressional work. There's many ways of working in this campaign against intervention and war. I would say one thing from a particular experience, that it's really important to be consistent and from the very beginning emphasizing why we're doing what we're doing, and not just repeated passionate messages about what is wrong or how ridiculous the other side is, but really specifying even more clearly why we're doing what we're doing, who we are, and what we're doing it for, and just to have that messaging in all our communications. But there's enough common ground for people who work in many different groups to coalesce around this, the whole issue of the military budget, the intervention that is part of that, and really build a peace movement that many types of people can participate in. And I think should be our goal for some time to come.
I just want to say thank you for your service, because we always say that to people who go off and fight in wars. I think we should also say it to people who fight for peace.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great night.
I was really happy to have that exclusive with those 4 embassy protectors, the final 4 that were in there for the duration until they were illegally raided and arrested in violation of the Vienna Convention. The weekend after Memorial Day, I'm going to be heading up to San Francisco to cover the California Democratic Party convention. There's going to be a lot of fireworks. We have a hotly contested race for chair of the California Democratic Party now that Eric Bauman had to step down in disgrace. And we also have a contested election. The second time the election in Assembly District 51 has been contested. And then the final thing that's happening is the candidates. Most of the Democratic Party candidates are coming to address the California Democratic Party because California's primary is so important. And so I will be covering those speeches. And that is when you will see me next. So please share this show and keep fighting.